Dombo Kalungi, Sadam Guvaro, and Sanjay Tongi, Tata Numaraka, Rongi, Tongi Pamatan, and Indra Chamboyova. That and the and the Tongi, the Songi Yakon, like a good. Take a Parasava, Tambo, and a Tombo, and it, Yamso Lane, the Sanjay Tongi, Songi. Now,
before setting out to listen to the teaching, to the Dharma instructions, which Rinpoche is about to continue, we should yet again check our motivation. We should make sure that our motivation is the proper one. Now, in order to do so, it is necessary that we yet again remind ourselves of the fact that there are countless beings out there who undergo all sorts of unspeakable sufferings, powerless to do anything about it. All of these beings have invariably, in one lifetime or another, been our kind mothers. And therefore, thinking of their suffering, this in turn might give rise to the thought of kindness and compassion towards them, and to the wish from the bottom of our hearts that we might find ways to liberate them from their suffering, not only in this time but lastingly. Therefore, we should set out to listen to Dharma instructions, to learn the Dharma, to put the Dharma into practice, and having assured ourselves of the fact that there actually is such a teaching, we should then, with great diligence, endeavor to learn that teaching. Because if we were able to bring about the lasting liberation of all of these mother sentient beings who are out there, who are undergoing suffering after lifetime, etc., then that indeed would be the greatest endeavor that we could possibly put into action. So therefore, with this motivation to bring about the lasting benefit and welfare for beings by way of learning and practicing the Dharma, that should be our motivation while sitting here and listening to such instructions. We have consequently heard that those who set out upon that path that leads to the liberation of beings is the path of bodhisattvas. Those who endeavor to take that kind of action upon themselves are known as bodhisattvas, and that which brings these activities which bodhisattvas employ in order to bring about the benefit and welfare for beings are known as the 6 transcendent virtues, or the 6 paramitas. Of these 6, we have already heard about 2. We have heard about the paramita, or the transcendent virtue of generosity, and we have heard about appropriate conduct, also known as discipline. Now, the third of these 6 activities, of these transcendent virtues, is known as the paramita of patience. As before, also with this paramita, or the transcendent virtue of patience, again there are 3 types of patience that one should practice, or that one is eventually endowed with. The first type of patience is known as patience in the face of adversity, which means to say that whenever one finds oneself confronted with disagreeable circumstances of whatever kind, that one patiently bears such consequences. The second type of patience is the kind of patience that allows us to accept such adverse circumstances, such disagreeable situations, confrontations, with a joyful mind, joyfully accepting them, letting them be, and doing, and making the best out of whatever situation presents itself. And the third kind of patience is patience in regard to ultimate or true reality. This pertains particularly to those who feel fear whenever they're being told that the entire world of appearances and phenomena, including their own problems, including their own minds for that matter, are ultimately empty of any inherent self-nature, are ultimately empty of any substance, therefore non-existent. Whenever they hear about this, a great fear grips them. So one also has to learn to be patient, or to patiently accept the fact, or appreciate the fact, that apparent phenomena and appearances are ultimately empty, free of any substance, free of any self-nature whatsoever. Now back to the first type of patience, which is that of calmly bearing whatever adverse circumstance, whatever disagreeable circumstance one may find oneself in. That in itself already asks quite a lot of us. It is not something that is easily done, it is something that requires a great deal of strength, and something that requires also a great deal of courage. Concerning these points, the great Indian master Shantideva has said, there is no greater harm than anger, and there is no greater virtue than patience. Which means to say that anger is the predominant mental affliction that causes us, and others for that matter, all sorts of trouble, all sorts of pain, all sorts of harm. And to bear anger in a patient way, not to be swept away, not to be overwhelmed by anger, not to react on it blindly, but so to speak, sitting through it in a calm and a detached way and practicing patience in the face of anger. That requires all of our strengths, that requires all of our courage, and we'll presently hear more about this. In the face of all of this, we should consider one thing, and that is the fact of impermanence. Presently, we are all together here, or we might find ourselves together with our families, with our close and loved ones, or we might have come together to such a gathering as the one here today of many Dharma friends in order to listen to Dharma instructions. However, it goes without saying that none of these gatherings has any lasting nature. Even though we might spend a great deal of time with one or the other person, eventually that will come to an end. And even if you should have spent a whole lifetime with a partner, with a family member, or whoever it might be for that matter, eventually death will come and will separate us. No one of us can say when that will happen, but it will happen. That much is for sure. It is just as the great Indian Mahasiddha who went to Tibet, Padampa Sanjay, said in one of his 100 instructions to the people of Tingri. He says, family bonds are as unstable as market gatherings. Therefore, do not waste your time with petty fighting, you people of Tingri. And that is exactly what he expressed in this way. Whatever time we have in this world, no one of us is able to say how much there is. We should not waste it with being spiteful, with fighting, with quarreling among each other, but rather make useful, make positive use of whatever time is given us, because no one of us knows how much time we have at our disposal. Some might have a lot of time, some might have a lot less time. Therefore, it is greatly advisable to use that time in a positive and in a constructive way.
I think
Patience in the face of adversity is not an easy thing to practice, as all of us only know all too well. And if we look, for instance, to stay with the analogy, if we just look within our families, then it goes without saying that by far not all of these family members are what we could in any which way term bodhisattvas. Then invariably, as it has happened so many times, and as we all have experienced many times, occasionally there will be disagreements, and if the situation is already potentially explosive, even a small word is enough to set the explosion off. Then all of a sudden, from one moment to the next, one finds oneself in the best of fights. One is being shouted at, one is being abused in any which way, and one wonders now, how on earth did that happen? But then we are usually habituated to replying in kind immediately. If that happens, then the two fighting parties will have themselves the nicest of fighting matches in no time, and then things are truly gone the wrong way. Now, in the face of such possible catastrophe, it would be a useful thing to, at least for one party, to try to practice patience in such a situation. Instead of replying in kind right away without thinking for a second, just shouting back at the other one, abusing the other one just as one is being abused, instead of doing that, which would be our normal habitual tendency, one could take oneself back for a second and just look at the anger that the other people is projecting. For the most part, it's not a very pleasant sight at all, and we could give rise to the idea, oh, indeed, now great anger has taken hold of that person. Now, if I join in, then things only get worse. No one will benefit of this situation whatsoever. Therefore, wouldn't it be much more useful to try to be patient, to simply let the moment pass, to swallow whatever insults are being hurled at us, and try to diffuse the situation in this way? If we were to practice that, great benefit would derive thereof. We all know such situations, we've all been there, and in all likelihood we are going to be there again. And it often happens even that one or the other party starts crying, particularly women are rather prone to that. And it has been known already that some women occasionally even grab a stick and really give their husbands a good beating. So that is one of the great dangers that one incurs if one should give in to such situations. Therefore, particularly all of you guys out there, beware. So therefore, Rinpoche says, it is very apparent that instead of giving in to the habits that we have accumulated over so many lifetimes, and simply fighting back as would be the normal reaction, it would be much more beneficial for everybody concerned, the other person as well as ourselves, if we would be able to swallow the insult, to look at the situation in a detached way and try to diffuse it by way of practicing patience in the face of such adverse and disagreeable circumstances. Now, to set the record straight and also to save face, Rinpoche also points out that occasionally it has been heard that not only women beat their husbands, but also husbands beat their wives. Occasionally there are such guys, large, big, strong, overweight maybe, who at the slightest of notions fly into a terrible rage. And then it's rant, rave, shout, and just the slightest wrong word can also then end in a potentially very dangerous and catastrophic situation. Such men have also been known to beat their wives, so the wives would be good advised in such situations to maybe just cry quietly and just beware lest they catch a beating. Now, so much for the first type of patience, which is patience in the face of adversity, which now brings us to the second type of patience, which is the patience that allows us to accept difficulties, not only accept them, but accept them even joyfully. The example that Rinpoche uses is that of someone who has resolved to practice the Dharma, and someone who has started the preliminary practices, those which are commonly known as Ngondro. It is commonly known that the first of these practices is the performance of 100,000 prostrations together with the repetition of the refuge prayer. Now, in the course of such prostrations, which will for the most part take for quite a while until accumulated, it goes without saying that we will at one point or another undergo some, at least, physical difficulties. There are people who develop back problems, or their knees start to hurt, or it's their hands or arms, or any such thing starts to hurt after a while when we do prostrations vigorously. And of course that causes us some suffering, that causes us some disagreeable circumstances. However, we should remind ourselves of the fact whenever such problems in the course of practice of whatever type are being experienced, that they are actually part of that which we have joyfully and happily resolved to do. That they are a part of our bringing about lasting happiness. They are part of our path that leads to liberation from suffering lastingly. And therefore, if one speaks about patience that allows one to accept disagreeable circumstances even in a joyful manner, that would be exactly the type of patience that would be required in the face of such rather minor problems. There are others who do not practice in this particular way, who do not practice the preliminaries, yet still encounter difficulties. Someone who might have a rather tiring, a rather demanding job, comes home in the evening for the most part tired, for the most part exhausted, and yet there still is some such practice to be done. This pertains particularly to those who either have strongly resolved to perform a certain practice daily, however shortly, and also to those who have taken certain commitments upon themselves, who have promised to their teachers that they're going to do at least a minimum of some such practice, no matter what it is, every day. In this regard, it does not matter whether one does a very elaborate practice session or whether one trains oneself in a very short practice session. The point here is that even though one is exhausted, one feels tired, that one still resolves to do the practice, even in the face of this inconvenience of not being able to put up one's feet right away. And it is said that if one were to practice this type of patience, then even though one feels tired and exhausted from whatever work one does, one still joyfully would sit down and perform that practice, however shortly, but one would do it. That would also be an example for the second type of practice of patience that allows us to take adverse circumstances upon ourselves, even in a joyful manner. Particularly among those who have taken some sort of commitment upon themselves to do whatever practice on a regular basis, preferably daily, it time and again happens that for whatever reasons one forgets to do it. You might either be so stressed out from your work that you forget your commitments for a day or two or three, or occasionally you might find yourself sick and unable to fulfill your commitment for a couple of days or however long it takes. One should know that there is no great damage, no great harm done in this. Whenever one remembers the commitment whenever one is able to fulfill the commitment again, either that one has relaxed sufficiently, that one finds the strength again to do so, or for instance, when one has been sick and the sickness has finally subsided, that one is able again to fulfill one's commitments, one then simply takes one's practice up again at the point where one has left off and continues. Then, if one practices this, if one proceeds in this way, then there is no mistake, no problem incurred.
Tenga tuna, and Coronsana Penjitoch and Bojolo. Some Georgia tended to oppose yours is on it. Then you touch him with you. Tenga comes out the thing you touch your Google manes. Some Georgia the yen, Marons on a rankies for your ears. More than 10 hours yen and the top de wat and the last of a hine.
So much for the second part of patience, which then brings us to the third part, which is the patience in the face of understanding reality as it truly is. Oftentimes, when we hear Dharma instructions, we hear such words of apparent phenomena, the world of appearances and phenomena, being empty, being free of any substance, having no inherent self-nature whatsoever. We're also told that our own minds, our own consciousnesses, are in the end non-existent, have no substance, have no self-nature, or anything of that, anything like that, for that matter, to themselves, to itself. Now, some people, certain characters, when hearing about this, when hearing about the fact that not only the world of appearances and phenomena, but also that perceiving consciousness of ours, that mind which perceives that world, when hearing about the fact that all of this has no substance, has no self-nature unto itself, to itself whatsoever, many people who hear about this simply panic. They have no idea how to deal with this, because this thing that we call consciousness or mind is so utterly ungraspable, so completely untraceable. However hard we might try to dub any characteristics, any defining qualities onto this consciousness or mind of ours, we will eventually miserably fail. There is no color to this mind, there is no shape to this consciousness, there is not even a particular space, a particular spot where this consciousness resides. This indeed strikes fear into the heart of some. However, it is of great importance that we come to understand and realize that this very consciousness of ours, which is so utterly ungraspable, so undescribable, so free of any characteristics, that it has forever been with us. It is basically what we are. And this undescribable, ungraspable consciousness, free of any defining characteristics whatsoever, is the very basis for everything that appears within the cycle of sufferings and misery that is commonly known as samsara, as well as within that which is known as the going beyond of suffering that we commonly term nirvana. Now, if we make our peace with the fact that this has forever been so, and that this will always be so, that this is the very nature of that thing which we call mind or consciousness, then indeed, if we come to realize and to actualize this within ourselves, then a great many qualities can arise, can arise out of that realization. So that would be termed, or that would be called, the patience in the face of understanding true reality.
Do Tado Zapakona, Random Agency Yori. Then come knock a set to Zai, Jibbo to the Songi because of Jagal, the Zan and the Namana Lani. Then Zan come by Junjun Zoni, the Tinona, Gamjavio. The Zai Jibbo is Continona Gamjate. Then you're the Jabu Chambuche Yori. Jarbotella, Zimmo Yori. Then it's a mongashi, Nimukala, then Jano Zapanawas, Drone, they call on some shoe show you. Then in Jabuke, something, I don't summon Carandro. Oh, Jarichi, some of your nurses like Ganunki, young to tell a shoe show and Drogan to Larry. And in Jabuke, I don't summon them to call on walk or Drogan, Sonny, call on Pemmy, she had done shoot Chambutumari. Then check her, Jadon Sencha Cor, and then Coron Yopomo will take, and then let you on. And then let you on and do any Gano, Zapanawaku, Sumotanjila, choose on the Yoyo. And then Jarbo Jela, Chola Mensuin Larry. Gano de Zapanawa Yan Larry. Ya, Cho Zapa country, Nagameta Ade. 这是出下，老把也把你记着的，他叫顺应的，我日本那玩意送的，俺叫日本看着那个大，用老把也把它记着的，他叫顺应的，俺日本那玩意这，人家不这是也把记，人家请我们日本那玩意都，俺让个这些来对把全部烧上。 人家不个烧菜，下把坡，这里这玩意。但是干弄这个，他马上个日本干巴拉的，相当长的没。我呢听着话，人呐，马上个老板呢，我们东西人家的用啊，说的马上打巴的，这马上打的我呢，烧你的我们东西人家的送来的，这一点人都你日本全部干的。
Giving rise to patience in whatever adverse circumstances brings about very great qualities and allows us not to fall under the spell of anger or some such defiling emotion anymore, which is a very beneficial thing not only for ourselves but for everybody concerned. Now, concerning the great blessing, the great qualities that appear through such patience, there is a story, an ancient story about a renunciant, a monk who lived as a hermit in a forest in India. In that country in which he lived, there were a great many forests, and as it was the custom at the time, he built himself a small hut out of leaves and grass, and he sat in that hut in the middle of the forest, and he practiced there, and meditated, and trained himself. His name was He Who Speaks of Patience, or He Who Teaches Patience. The nearby palace of the ruling king of that country was inhabited by the king himself, and as it was the custom at the time, this king had a rather large number of queens, and his queens, all his wives, they occasionally went for walks in the forest. Eventually they came upon that hermit, they came upon that monk who taught them the Dharma. And one day the king noticed that quite a number of his queens were missing. They were nowhere about, and he asked his retainers, he said, "Where are my queens?" And he sent out people to look for them, and eventually one of them came back and said, "Oh great king, your queens, or at least some of them, are in the forest where they're listening to a monk who teaches them the Dharma." Upon that the king really flew into a rage, and he thought, who is that hermit who dares mess with my queens? He's just going to confuse them, and they're going to have all sorts of funny ideas. That doesn't go at all. I'm going to teach him. So together with a whole large number of soldiers and other retainers, all of them armed to the teeth, he rushed into that forest and finally came upon that scene where indeed his queens were sitting respectfully listening to this monk teaching the Dharma. he burst right into the scene. He drew his sword and he shouted at that monk, "Who are you? How dare you do what you're doing here?" And the monk then just calmly, being asked who he is, he just calmly responded, "I am he who speaks of patience. I am he who teaches patience." And the king, very angry, he drew his sword, he brandished his sword, and he said, "Well, we'll see about that." And he cut off his right arm. And he asked him, "Okay, what's your name now?" And the monk still replied calmly, he said, "I am he who speaks of patience." The king was still not satisfied. He cut off his left arm and said, "Who are you now?" And as we can imagine already, the answer was the same. Again he said, "I am he who teaches patience." At that moment, the king realized his error. He was filled with great remorse. He apologized to the hermit. He prostrated to him and he asked for forgiveness. He said, "I have done you great wrong, and indeed you seem to be an exceptional being. And please forgive my wrongdoing." And the monk, who had just had his 2 arms cut off in such a cruel way, he then spoke the words, "If it is true that I am without anger in whatever situation, in whatever circumstance, may my 2 hands which have just been cut off be immediately restored." And so it happened right that very moment. Everybody was very respectful to the monk and venerated him. And this is just one of many stories that shows or that demonstrates how great a blessing it is to practice patience in the face of whatever adversity and whatever great qualities arise out of the practice of patience. We
True.
have some more time for some questions, if there should be any.